and thanks for listening to Finding Jesus in an Arab Village. Many of you have probably seen the movie or even watched the musical based off Victor Hugo's 19th century novel Les Miserables, but not as many people have read the book. While the storylines between the book and the movie are similar, you miss the detail if you only watch the movie. In the book, Victor Hugo takes great effort describing the sights and the smells and the sounds of each scene. He draws you into the world of 19th century French culture. This same dichotomy can exist when reading the Bible with only a Western cultural perspective. Most of the time, we can understand the major point of the story, but how much do we miss by not stepping into the culture? I think we gain greater clarity by understanding what was going on around Jesus when he taught us what it means to follow him. What were the sights and the smells in the air? What was in bloom? Or what was the weather like? And perhaps most importantly, what was the cultural context of each of his stories? A good example of this is found in Acts chapter 10. This is a story where God speaks to a Roman centurion named Cornelius and tells him to send for Peter, who was staying with a man named Simon the tanner. The story seems pretty straightforward, right? But I think there is much more going on here. You see, a tanner is someone who makes hides from animal skins, so he would have worked with dead animals. In addition, one of the elements used to tan hide was animal dung. This means that a tanner would have been dealing with carcasses and manure all throughout the day. In fact, the tanner's workplace had to be downwind from the town, and they were exempt from Jewish temple pilgrimage on festival days because they stunk so bad. In addition, there were very few provisions which allowed a woman to initiate divorce, but one of the reasons which was allowed was if the husband was a tanner, presumably because he would have smelled so bad. This gives some interesting insights into the story of Peter and Simon the tanner. First of all, it makes us wonder the real reason Peter was on the roof during the sixth hour of the day. This is high noon, the hottest time of the day, when generally you'd want to be inside. Unless, of course, you had to be inside with someone who worked with dead animals and manure all day. Perhaps Peter preferred fresh air in the exposed sun rather than the cool shade of a tanner's house. Secondly, and more importantly, the fact that Peter is staying at a tanner's house in the first place fits into the bigger picture of what God is doing overall. Remember that God gives a vision to Cornelius, a Gentile. At the same time, Peter has a dream where he is instructed by God that foods that were once considered unholy and forbidden to eat by Jewish law should now be considered clean. And Peter himself in verse 28 acknowledges that it is forbidden for him to associate with any group of Gentiles, yet he is staying there with the Gentile Cornelius and his friends and family. And finally, God pours out his Spirit upon all the Gentiles that are there. So the fact that Peter is staying at a tanner's home, someone considered unclean by Jewish law and seemingly marginalized in society, perfectly fits the context of this story. It shows that God orchestrated all the details of this narrative in order to illustrate that he favors no one. Jew, Gentile, an elite Roman soldier, or the lowly tanner, all are welcome. This is just one very small example of how, by understanding the context, we can gain greater insights into the message. Well, what does this have to do with finding Jesus in an Arab village? In certain places in the Middle East, especially the more remote Arab villages, there still exists a culture that has a lot in common with what life would have been like in the first century. I mean, in many places in the Middle East, they still plow their fields with donkeys. Families are represented by their local family patriarch. They still shepherd sheep and grow olives. Even the way they do life is unique. In the West, our entire day is scheduled almost down to the minute. Time is money. Productivity reigns supreme. But in the Middle East, time is very relative. A day is not measured by how productive you are. But most Americans are not naturally familiar with this context. It's easy to read our own Western culture into the culture of the Bible. It is important that we understand and interpret Jesus through his own world. But of course, it's difficult for a 21st century American to really comprehend what life was like nearly 2,000 years ago in a foreign land with a different language and an entirely different way of doing life. I mean, Jesus told stories. He used things that were familiar to people. The landscape, the sights, and the smells were the backdrop to the story, while the audience often became the actors. That is why it is important that we as Westerners make an effort to enter into the world And when we do, it can be the difference between watching the movie Les Miserables or gaining a fuller picture by reading the book. I believe through an observation of many Middle Eastern traditions and customs, you will find a richer and more culturally nuanced understanding of the first century world of Jesus, and even the Bible in general. In addition, I hope this series will provide an appreciation for the people and culture of the Middle East, especially in an age where East and West seem to be growing further apart. Well, thanks for listening, and I look forward to next time when we can find Jesus in an Arab village. Ma'asalame alamakum. Goodbye, and may God be with you.